So good morning, everybody. My name is Kate Wimpress, and I have the privilege of being the chair of the Scottish Regeneration Forum. And I'm very pleased to welcome you to this, our second online conference. Now, it is great to see so many people from across the country joining us this morning. Now, whilst some of us may remember the convivial atmosphere of the COSLA conference room, I think there is something to be said about the flexibility of joining online, and of course it makes the discussions that much more accessible. And of course the other bonus of meeting online is that the conference is recorded and shared on YouTube, and it will be up on online later on today. So at that point, if you don't want to be on the recording, please take the opportunity to turn off your camera, and of course you also have the opportunity to change your name. Tom Arthur, the Minister for Public Finance, Planning and Community Wealth, had hoped to be with us this morning, but unfortunately, due to illness, has had to cancel at the last minute. But of course, with the recording, he will be able to avail of the discussions and contributions, and I'm sure will be interested to hear our stimulating and informative debates. And I can just reassure members of SURF that Ewan Leach, Chief Executive, and I have a meeting lined up with the Minister for early October, so we'll be able to take the themes and findings of today and the next couple of sessions to him directly. I'm very pleased that Ian Murray, Regeneration Unit Policy Officer, has been able to step in for the Minister at the last minute and will be able to give us the Scottish Government perspective today. So at our last conference, you may recall the Advisory Group on Economic Recovery had just made its recommendations to the Scottish Government. And since that time, last August, both the Social Renewal Advisory Board and the Citizens' Assembly have made their recommendations public. So it's clear to see that there is close alignment between the latter recommendations with the SURF Manifesto. And for anybody who hasn't had the opportunity to see the SURF Manifesto, it is available on our website. The manifesto draws on the thinking and experiences of the SURF network, and there's synergies, particularly around sustainability, investing in young people, and of course, a focus on tackling poverty, which is no surprise to any of our number. So now we're safely into the new parliamentary session, and the Scottish Government will respond to these recommendations, and that of course will be coupled with the learning arising from the changed environment that the pandemic has engendered, both in terms of funding and practice. Across our 3 online sessions this week, the SURF conference will look at 4 items. First, today, how government and communities can respond to and deliver on these recommendations. Secondly, we're going to look at place-based regeneration in this changed context. Thirdly, we're going to hear from funders and what their priorities are. And fourthly, we're going to assess how community regeneration can respond to the climate crisis. So I hope you will agree, a very full and dynamic and challenging agenda. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome you again. Thank you for taking the time to join us this morning. And I'm going to hand over to Chief Executive Ewan Leach to tell us more about today's proceedings. Ewan.
Thank you very much, Kate, and welcome everyone to, we do have said a foggy Edinburgh, but the fog does appear to be lifting. And that's maybe a metaphor for things in general within society. The fog does seem to be lifting, and obviously we're still in a similar-ish place to where we were last year, and that we are online, but it's good to welcome you to the space this morning. As Kate has said, we are looking at policy today, and from, I suppose, a national perspective, and our morning is beginning with a sort of overview of the impact of COVID in a wider sort of national context, as we hear from Helen Ray, the Head of Programmes and Philanthropy at Foundation Scotland. And then we will look at one very specific example of action that took place during COVID, when we hear from Terry Patterson from the Larkhall Community Partnership. And we'll follow that with hearing from the government in the form of Ian Murray. And that will be followed by a discussion which has Anna Fowley and Kate and Lisa McLean, chaired by Hazel Cross. As we have a discussion around the various things that came out last year, it was excellent. The SURF Manifesto was an excellent piece of work done primarily by my colleague Derek and Chris, who's not with us today. And it was based on the contributions that came from you. And it was interesting to see that in the run-up to the election, there was strong support from a broad cross-section of the political parties in what the manifesto was asking. And I suppose what we look at this morning is discussing is how do we make that all happen? But before we begin this morning, we're going to have a poll later, but we're going to trial it just now with some simple questions just to find out where everyone is. And if Chris, could you share the poll just now for us?
Yep, I'm just setting it. Polls. And continue. That's it.
Okay, we can see the questions. So this is asking, where are you right now? And it's scroll down. If you click on it, you can scroll down. It says which part of the country you're joining us from, and which sector best represents your main professional or voluntary role. So if you could all start filling that in so that we can check that the polling actually works.
Just 4 more to go, if they want to answer.
Okay, we've got 30 out of 41. That's 92% is a good response rate.
So shall we end the poll and show the results?
Yeah.
That's almost everybody there now. And that you can see where you are. There you are. Okay,
so we still have 85% of us are at home, 13% are in the office. We have a cross section of, we have nobody from outside Scotland today. I believe at the last conference we did have somebody from last year, we did have people from outside Scotland, but we have a cross section, mainly central Scotland, Edinburgh and Glasgow, but all parts of the country are represented. And in terms of who is in attendance, primarily community groups, charity, social enterprise, which is no surprises to see who's represented at a SURF event with private business, public sector, local and national being present as well. So thank you very much for testing that with us this morning. Good to see where everyone is from, and we will be polling you with some other questions after the first part of our session this morning. So we'll now hand over to Helen and Terry. Helen and Terry are both giving presentations, and then we'll have a Q&A session for both of them after that. So Helen, can I hand over to you? And I think Chris, you're sharing Helen's presentation.
Sorry, 1 second. There we go. Sorry, thank you very much. So thank you for inviting me along today to talk about the lessons that we learned from providing funding support to respond to the impact of COVID in Scotland's community. For those of you who don't know us, Foundation Scotland provides grant funding on behalf of a range of philanthropists, companies and other charitable trusts and foundations. We also manage around 60 community benefit funds across Scotland. And these are funds where the communities themselves set the funding priorities and are also the decision makers. Foundation Scotland mainly focus on small grants under £5,000 to grassroots community organisations and charities. At the start of the first lockdown in March 2020, Foundation Scotland, in partnership with the National Emergencies Trust, launched our COVID-19 Response Fund. In addition to this, some of our existing donors also made funds available to help support communities' response to the pandemic at a local level. We named our COVID fund Response, Recovery and Resilience, which more commonly became known as RRR. In total, we distributed about 7.8 million in grants to charities, community groups, and those working to respond to the impact of COVID in their communities. Next slide, please. In the early stages of the pandemic, to ensure that we were directing funding appropriately, we asked the Scottish Community Development Centre to research the immediate challenges that the communities were facing due to the crisis. SCDC spoke to the community groups who'd received RRR funding within the first 2 weeks of our launch. Their research showed that the most overwhelming challenges were meeting isolated people's immediate practical needs, tackling loneliness and promoting positive living and mental well-being. In addition to this, there was of course the challenge for community organisations and charities to move or adapt their services to become online and to support the remote working of their staff team and volunteers, and to ensure that they were still able to support their beneficiaries as much as possible. If you add to this the obvious increase in need, it was a perfect storm for community groups and charities to operate in. As the restrictions started to ease in 2021 and organisations began to look to the future, we went back to SCDC to commission further research. We wanted to assess the impact of our COVID fund and to look again at the lessons learned and the challenges facing communities as we try to move forward. Unsurprisingly, some of these challenges remain the same, with the key areas of need being identified as poor or worsening mental health and increased and uncovered poverty. Statutory provision isn't enough. Organisations are struggling to cope with demand. The role of charities and community organisations to provide solutions and support is ever more important. And our research showed a number of challenges and of course opportunities that have been identified through the work in COVID in communities over the last 18 months. Next slide, please. Some of the lessons learned have been highlighted through our evaluation of grant making and are as follows. There needs to be a focus on helping support the delivery of activities and services that meet immediate needs of isolated people, continuing to tackle loneliness and improve mental health and well-being. The role of community in responding to mental health needs was a strong feature of the evaluation of the RRR funding. As noted, this remains a high priority and reflects the amount of need that has surfaced during the pandemic. The pandemic uncovered hidden poverty and poor mental health in our communities, even where we had locally delivered funding and community benefit funds, and where the communities themselves were shaping priorities. And so this has highlighted the need to ensure that those underrepresented are consulted and can be heard when we're developing community action plans. Most organisations have seen an increase in demand for their services. They've had to adapt and expand at a rate that wouldn't typically experience within such a short space of time. They're having to constantly adapt and to flex to ensure they can meet demand and comply with the continually changing restrictions on guidance and safe operating practices. Supporting the sector to build capacity to remain agile and flexible is important. So we need to invest in capacity building to allow charities and community groups to focus on their internal development and infrastructure. Planning and development time for charities should not be underestimated. Further evidence of the importance of capacity building noted in the evaluation was the development of more equitable relationships between community-run projects and the statutory sector. Groups reported to us that they felt they had been given a seat at the table during COVID, and they want to sustain and develop this. But to sustain and develop this, many community projects need capacity building support to help them to participate in a more informed and confident fashion. Digital capacity building is still required. While many organisations moved their staff, volunteers and services online, they need the capacity to further develop their digital know-how and to engage with digital provision. There's also a recognition of digital fatigue. As we move forward, there's a balance to be struck between the opportunities of working digitally and the importance of face-to-face support. One very positive aspect of the community response to COVID-19 has been an increase in volunteering. However, this is also presenting as a challenge in sustaining this involvement and responding to the volunteers' development support required. The role of staff and volunteers changed significantly during the pandemic and continues to do so as we emerge from restrictions. Investment in volunteer and staff training is hugely important. The pandemic also highlighted our reliance on older volunteers. There's an emerging need to encourage and retain younger volunteers to help future sustainability, and investing in training and development should strengthen this. Flexible and unrestricted funding needs to be made available. As funders, we need to continue to show the same level of trust in organisations that we did during the initial crisis funding, to trust in their knowledge and ability to deliver the best course of action for them and the communities that they serve. We need to consider longer term outcomes and not just the immediate activities provided. Some organisations have remained closed and are now struggling to reopen. The loss of income for such a long period has left many organisations vulnerable. Support to reopen is needed, and consideration about how small groups can then support their beneficiaries to re-engage. Many people, particularly those who've been shielding for a long time, are nervous about meeting and about being out and about. Small community organisations and charities need support to consider how to build reserves and to help future-proof them for future challenges. Next slide, please. Collaboration and cross-referral are hugely important, and we should look at ways to enable and encourage more of this within communities. The local responses to the pandemic saw organisations sharing resources, cross-referring people who access or need their services, and coordinating services. Our COVID fund evaluation highlighted that the best, quickest collaborative responses happened in areas where there was already good pre-existing relationships and collaborations in place. Therefore, investing in building opportunities for collaboration, co-production of services, and increased community cohesion is very important. Unsurprisingly, sustainability and the fragility of some charities and community organisations was highlighted during 2020. Secure, stable funding is a constant challenge for community projects. Therefore, consideration to funding models, excuse me, and support for building organisational resilience is important for building resilient communities. Communities all over Scotland responded. It was the local solutions and responses that got us through. Communities know what needs to be done and provide local solutions to the problems manifesting within their communities. Support for local community infrastructure and cohesive communities and continuing to build on the increased community spirit we saw in 2020 is vital going forward. Charities and community organisations need to look outward and to engage and collaborate with others in their local community. They need to identify opportunities to work together to co-design services, share resources, and build strong local networks. From funders, flexibility and trust are needed. As funders, we need to give more control to the organisations we fund and how they use the funding provided and support them with their long-term aims. The needs of organisations and the beneficiaries they serve change. We need to empower organisations to identify their own needs and priorities and not be bound by trying to identify specific items or budget headings to meet the needs of funders. In summary, communities are best placed to provide the solutions to the issues that they face and need to continue to work together to tackle the impact of COVID-19. This has exacerbated already challenging issues such as poverty and poor mental health. Strong local connections and networks will lead to more resilient communities. Funders need to work more with communities to allow for community-led solutions through the provision of less restrictive funding and placing more trust in our applicants to know what's best. We need to enable capacity building to ensure we can help organisations develop strong internal systems and infrastructure to help them grow and become more resilient to face all of the future challenges that lie ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen. That was fantastic because it gave a really good overview, and it also reinforced, I think, a lot of the learning that we've heard over the past month of July in our shared learning projects from the SURF Awards, and hearing how communities have adapted, good things, negative things, but also the changes that need to happen. So the two things that I will be interested in picking up on is the need for cross-referral, and how we heard about sometimes that was a challenge actually to do, sometimes because of confidentiality reasons, but also meeting the needs of funders was a good phrase to have in it, because I think all of us probably look at funders' criteria and adapt what we say to meet funders' needs, rather than it being funders looking to focus on the needs of the communities in which they are providing funding. So that's some really interesting points there, which no doubt will come up in the Q&A. That's a national overview, and I think from having heard about what's happened in Larkhall over the past year, last month, I think Terry may be reinforcing some of the point from the individual experiences of what they delivered in Larkhall over the past 18 months. So over to you, Terry, and thanks for sharing your screen.
Thank you. Thank you, Helen, for that. Have you ever been put in a position where you feel as if your presentation is now redundant? It's everything that you have highlighted. I am going to be sharing on the screen. Thank you very much. Larkhall Community Network was given the Special Recognition Award last year, of which we are exceptionally thankful and privileged to be put in that place. And we're one of many communities within the country, as Helen has highlighted, that responded immediately to this unknown crisis, this unknown length of time that we were going to have to deal with lockdown and the associated fallout of that. I think it's always important that you know who is speaking to you. Part of my background in the bio that was put out was one where I worked within the prison walls for 25 years with a national charity. That taught me a great deal while I was there, that behind every prisoner and every employee there is a family. And the family, particularly of the prisoners, are the people that are most affected. And those families are sitting in our communities today. And there is needs that they have that I picked up over the years I was in prison. I wasn't personally in prison. Do not think I was serving a sentence. That was always the hilarity with the family, that I was spending the night in prison. But anyway, coming to Larkhall, I came for a year. That was 17 years ago. I found a community of people that were most interesting and challenging, having been born and bred in Paisley. It was a completely different environment, but one that challenged me to the core. We came over here to look after a church for 1 year, and 17 years later, I'm embedded within the community, and I'm thankful for those that are round about me, who I have learned a great deal from, particularly the community itself. We at Larkhall Community Network was established when this announcement came out. First announcement, 3 weeks of pandemic, it's going to be over. And we'll go back to normal. So the local response was a doorstep visit. Anyone who had spare food for families who now found themselves with children at home waiting to be entertained, and because it was now coming up for Easter break, they were looking for all the activities that the other third sector organisations would provide during school closure. So the network, the response was doorstep. Anyone with a need for food and entertainment for the children while they were off. We sit in an area with 2 SIMD areas, so the need was great. The response, contact, they had a need, we tried to meet it. Second announcement that changed everything for us was the lockdown to the 31st of July. We were already established. Helen highlighted a very crucial point. Communities benefit from partnership working. We already had an existing partnership in place for approximately 18 months. There had been a group of local organisations, third sector charities, public and private sector meeting. They were the Larkhall Plan Partnership. They had, due to a funding commitment that we had made, Larkhall Community Growers had made, we had said that we would run a survey and find out the view of the people within our area. 18 months of preparation, working with all these different people. They had prepared the survey questions. It had been actioned and the responses were in. The analysis had been done, and we had prepared this document, Larkhall Community Plan Results. It was due to be launched on the 23rd of March 2020, but we all know what happened on that day. The network was there, the partnership working was there, and from there, after the second announcement, we pulled in that partnership and brought together Larkhall Community Leads Group. We realised that everybody wanted to help. That now had to be coordinated in such a fashion that we reached more people within our area of Larkhall, Ashgill, Netherburn and Dulcet. 18,000 people now had the opportunity to be served by their community if need arose. So from there, oh, sorry, it went back the way. Oops, what is it? There we go. Larkhall Christians Together Larkhall District Volunteer Group, Larkhall Community Growers and Community Links were 4 lead organisations within the area. Larkhall Christians Together brought the hub, which is the building I'm sitting in. It's a community asset transfer. We allowed the building to be used for food storage. Someone is trying to come in just now. That's the thing about sitting in these buildings. They brought storage, and the chair, Nancy Barr of Larkhall Christians Together, she started to chair the network. Larkhall District Volunteer Group, Sandra McCrory, the offering from them was the buses, their community bus fleet, their kitchens for Mr. T to cook 100 hot meals that were to be delivered to those who were isolating. Mr. T also was the recipient of the Prime Minister's Point Light Award. Also had call line, the community group call line went through the roof because of people needing support. Larkhall Community Growers, which is my organisation and the one I represent, we were responsible for the finances. I forgot to say that Larkhall District Volunteers, they became the anchor organisation for all the funding. Larkhall Community Growers took on the responsibility of the delivery and security of that funding, making sure it was spent appropriately and the best way we could. Community Links, they had one worker in Strother Hill area, and Community Links offered us 15 hours of their worker to actually come and run the admin and be able to pull all the information that we required for funders to prove to people that community groups can deliver better on the ground. We have that, as Helen highlighted, that local information, which is crucial. We knew our area and we knew the needs. Facebook and social media came in to play, and people found out about what was able to be delivered by this lead organisation. Other people that were involved with us, South Lanarkshire Council Community Engagement Team, they already were part of the survey group. So we already had that relationships that Craig at Community, the council had. He had great relationships with the NHS. So the NHS were able to promote the early years information that was now available online only to new mums. We distributed vitamins. The other third sector agencies within the area, they get involved because this platform had been formed that anyone who had an offering to the community that was needed in the response were able to bring their wares to the table, and we would find a way of distributing that to them. Community groups, we were overwhelmed, as Helen highlighted, the volunteers, they just wanted to help. This is community in action. People wanting to help their next door neighbours, wanting to help the children who were now faced with challenging situation of no school and home learning, homes that now had to pay for electricity that they weren't expecting to pay. We needed all the volunteers to be able to keep their ears and eyes open to answer the questions and the needs of our community. I must take my hat off to the private businesses within our area. We were able to buy so much from them because any funding we got, we kept as local as possible. Even though they were challenged in their income, they still gave more to us. You would ask for, say, £300, £400 worth of vouchers, they would give us the value of 500, 600. They gave out of what they had, which is absolutely marvellous. One of the taxi companies, him and his drivers knew this community inside out. They kept themselves going by delivering food to those that they knew were in need. They picked up the prescription runs. The community came together. Our community served our local people, which was absolutely fantastic. And it was all because the partnership was already there. Social media is a wonderful thing, but not everybody's on it. So 10,000 leaflets were delivered the old-fashioned way by trudging the streets and actually delivering it to each letterbox. Some of the delivery was given by rabbits, people going dressed up to entertain the children. It was good fun, but people just wanted to serve their community. So there was no one, our heart's desire was that no one would fall through the net. So we tried every avenue to make sure that wouldn't happen. We had great fun. Fun was crucial because none of us personally knew what was going to happen next. So we had to enjoy what we were doing to keep the people who were in need. They were valued members of our community, and we had to show that they were valuable, not just someone in need, but they had a value, that they were worth spending time with and serving with what we had to offer them. Yeah, it was a good time. What is our ask? Highlighted very well by Helen in a more detailed way, but this is the ask of an organisation that serves 18,000 households. Our wish and our heartfelt ask is that funding opportunities, as Helen highlighted, contains revenue, not just capital. We spent time filling in and looking at the place-based investment programme, no revenue. And we cannot shortchange our funders who are paying salaries by using that money to do another job. Our ask is that, as Helen again stole this point, and I'm very thankful for it, is to recognise that community groups can deliver a focused response. We know our communities, and that is what was beneficial over the period of the pandemic. Again, the funding came within weeks instead of within months. It was a free flow of funding. I have never had people phoning me up and saying, do you want £4,500? Do you want this? Do you want this lump sum of money? Because they knew us. We had a track record with them and we delivered on every occasion. So I was thankful for that. And one of the big asks, again, has been already highlighted, is that the community has a place at the table and are able to say what they want, what they need, and what their ask is, because they're the people who are living with our decisions. And it is wonderful that if they could have a place at the table, they would feel more involved and we would get more money, we would get more out of the money that is being spent. In closing, the response in a year, we had over 34,000 interactions with people in a year. We were given £100,000 from grants and we turned it into £300,000 by the in-kind and the offers from the community. We had over 8,000 hours of volunteer time, which would cost a fortune if you had to pay for it. So I thank you for this opportunity. I thank you that we have been given a platform as the very people that Helen was referring to be able to speak and say, we are here, we can do the job, and we are here to work with anyone that wants to work with us in providing a better service to our community. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Terry. That was great, and you did perfectly illustrate what Helen had been talking about at a national scale. And I suppose the three things that I would combine from both of what you said was need for revenue funding, trusting community groups, and being at the table. The period that we've been through, the communities have felt that they were a voice at the table. Can I open it up to the floor? Has anybody got any questions for Helen or Terry from what we've heard from both of them? You're welcome to put a question in the Q&A box or raise your hand. Helen, can I ask a question, I suppose, of you? I suppose from with that overview, how likely do you feel it is that there will be a significant change from a funder's perspective?
I think all funders, sort of as we come out of the restrictions, are looking at how they delivered during the pandemic and the changes that we made. So I think most funders are looking at how they deliver their funding, and certainly Foundation Scotland is looking internally now about how we structure our programmes and take consideration for being less sort of in the traditional grant making and looking at developing new funding models that better meet the needs of communities. And certainly the sense I get from discussions with other funders is that I think that's generally a direction of travel now, that they're moving out that sort of traditional grant making into sort of wider funding models, certainly.
Okay, that's good to hear. Obviously, we're hearing from funders tomorrow about what their agenda is in the short term. Any other questions from our audience? Derek.
Hi there. Yes, thanks very much, Terry and Helen. As you said, they chime very much with SURF's Manifesto consultations and some work we did last year at looking at how community groups responded to the immediate impacts of the pandemic. A question for you, Terry. I was really interested in the business links you spoke about. Do you think those are going to remain beyond the pandemic, or do you think those kind of improved links between community groups and businesses were kind of special one-off just because of the pandemic? I'm just wondering about the context in Larkhall.
No, I have to say that those relationships, which are solid, anytime you go in now, they're asking, what is it you want to do next? What is it you're planning and doing? It's all about relationship. In the relationship, we can serve people. If they're person-centred and we are focused on their community and the business world as well, what can we offer them? Then we are going to keep those relationships. It's hard work, but it is good work because the people who benefit are the community. So no, I would say they're there, well established.
Okay, thanks for that. So we have a question from Alistair Rind asking, commenting on Helen's reference to the need for capacity building within charities and organisations. And I suppose what he's asking is, are there any good success stories and ideas? I mean, it's a permanent challenge for charitable organisations that you want to do something new, but you're already maybe at capacity delivering what you already do. And so the growth can be quite challenging. I don't know, Helen, if you have any scenarios that you would use as an example.
I mean, well, certainly we ran a programme about 2 years ago called Transformation and Growth that was completely focused on capacity building for organisations. And the idea was to let the organisations come to us and tell us what they needed to allow them to grow and develop their infrastructure. So I can't think of any off the top of my head right now, but there was lots of good examples from that. It was specifically targeting organisations working with homelessness, but I know we funded a lot of additional posts to free up management team time to focus on growth. So I think it's probably something simple like that, you know, having the extra resources staff-wise to do the day-to-day delivery and allowing your management team or your trustees or your committee members to have some time to focus on planning and development.
Okay, thank you. Lisa and McLean, you have your hand raised, and then Kate.
Thanks, Ewan. I was just going to comment on one example that has worked well for us, or is working so far in the Outer Hebrides. Is we had formed a network of all the land trusts and were meeting informally for a number of years. I think the catalyst, though, came when COVID appeared. We realised we had to strengthen that and formalise that network. So we've set up a new organisation called Community Land Outer Hebrides. And the capacity building is happening because communities are helping each other to grow. Training, there's economies of scale, obviously, around training and development as well. But the sharing of knowledge and sharing of the very practical aspects of your organisation to support the growth in infrastructure and systems and processes has been probably the most helpful to date as well. So I would say that it's getting together and networking more and helping yourselves to increase in capacity has certainly helped us.
Okay, thank you very much, Lisa. And Kate?
Yeah, thanks very much, Ewan. And Terry, I wanted to ask a question. I mean, a lot of what you have said has resonated with me in terms of my day-to-day work with North Edinburgh Arts. I really recognise what the kind of challenges and successes that you had. One thing I was wondering about was this relationship with private businesses, and I'm wondering if it has changed the partners' approach to how you invest your funds and what where you get your goods and services from. Are you able now to have a kind of community wealth building approach where you invest in local services?
Yeah. We've always had a focus in, if we can buy it local, we stay local. So we built on that during the pandemic, and now we are formalising the partnership, the Larkhall network. That is our desire, that everything we do, all the organisations that are involved, that we keep it local, because our funding has to be spent to the benefit of local people. So any investment that we do, any investment, one of the Larkhall Community Growers projects is a gardening project. We're not gardeners, but it was one of our first projects. And the investment into that sits right in the middle of the high deprivation area. And the investment in the people, because of the investment that we have made in the local community, is paying off, and people are in a better place, and a lot of mental health issues within the area, and we're able to address them as well. So everything for us, Kate, is stay local as much as possible, and only when it is desperately necessary do we go outside our local community.
Okay, I think you can report back to Tom Arthur that the Scotland Loves Local concept is live and kicking in Larkhall. Final question from Elaine Gibb, or comment?
Probably a comment more. Thank you, Ewan. I wanted just to kind of, I guess, reiterate Terry's point about revenue and also unrestricted support being really important. I think we've always, at the foundation, William Grant Foundation, sorry, I forgot to introduce myself, recognise the importance of trusting those we work with. If we're going to give significant money to charities and communities, then surely we must already trust them to do what's right. And so enabling them to make decisions about how to deploy their funding best is really important. And unrestricted funding, is a really important way to do that. So I think there's a message there for funders, and there's lots of conversations at the moment around that. But I also wanted to pick up on that previous point about the importance of capacity building and doing that en masse and at a local level. And I just wanted to highlight a report which I've not read yet, but which I've just seen come out today around the importance of how local third sector infrastructure helped the sector respond to the crisis. And that's a report that's been conducted by the TSI network in conjunction with Evaluation Support Scotland on their important role in connecting and coordinating and sharing the work of the local sector during the crisis. And I guess my call there is more around a need for recognition for both local and specialist infrastructure support. Very often the infrastructure support for the sector gets kind of forgotten about, and I think it's really important that we and the public sector recognise the value of that, and enabling them to connect and direct and work with local communities and specialist local third sector organisations. So just a comment.
Okay, that's helpful. Elaine, if you can find that report and put it in the chat, then it means we've got a note of it and we can include it in the minutes for the meeting. You'll notice that there's also an offer from David Watt about some business connections training that is being made available. But these are really good points for us to move on now. So thank you very much to Terry and Helen, thank you. And we move on now to another poll that we're going to ask you some questions actually that reflect what we've just heard, and they're questions that are relevant to us for tomorrow, our discussion with the funders. So our first question, and this question is actually a repeat from last year. What is your general view of the prospects for building back better with regard to the future of poorer communities? And if you scroll down, we're asking, how confident are you that the lessons learned in the last 18 months will be taken forward by funders? We're having certainly positive signs there. And then another couple of questions on community wealth building and the 20-minute neighbourhood. So if you want to start answering those questions which have appeared. Take a bit longer than this morning's questions. Thank you, Elaine. Thank you for dropping that report into the chat. I think which everyone can now see. The final questions are actually asking what recommendations are people most familiar with between the Social Renewal Advisory Board, the Town Centre Action Plan, Citizens Assembly, or not. You're 85%. Can we get to the 92% response rate that we got first thing? 91. That's four. I think we're at 91%, which is a pretty good response rate. Chris, if you want to. We're at 93%. Okay. So, how confident are we that we can build that better? Well, 58% are optimistic, and I have the results from last year, and the results from last year were also 58% were optimistic. So our optimism levels remain the same. Pessimism, 31% were pessimistic last year, or this year, only 23% were pessimistic last year. So our pessimism has slightly gone up, maybe having lived through the reality of it, we know. Lessons being learned, almost 70% are feeling positive about that, which is something that we'll be sharing with the funding group that's speaking tomorrow, so that they know that you have confidence in maybe them changing their plans. Community wealth building, I mean, that's something that is in the Minister's, or community wealth is in Tom Arthur's job titles, which is good to see. And we can see there's a mixed response to that. And I suppose it's something that for some of us is maybe still a new concept, with people saying it's well meant but lacks practical application. I suppose in policy terms, that's often can kind of be the case. Policy sounds like a good idea, but what does it look like in practice? We're interested in that. 20-minute neighbourhood, a bit more of a positive response. And I suppose that's the result of maybe a few years of place principle and the place standard and things like that. So we're familiar with that. And of the groups that people are most familiar with the recommendations of, the Town Centre Action Plan Expert Review Group is the one that people are most familiar with their recommendations, which again is quite interesting. I think that one certainly had the most media publicity, I would say. It had the widest coverage in the press over the past year. So that's interesting that that was one that people are also most familiar with. And I'm sure those, the results of that, which we will make sure that we share afterwards, won't change what Ian Murray is about to tell us, because I'm sure his speech is well prepared. But that national policy perspective is something that we were expecting to hear from the Minister for Public Finance, Planning and Community Wealth. But we have the honour of having Ian Murray joining us, who leads on policy within the Regeneration Unit. So I'll hand over to you, Ian.
Thanks very much, Ewan. Thanks very much, Kate, and all at SURF for this belated opportunity to speak at the annual conference here. For those of you who haven't realised, I am not Tom Arthur. He has not aged very quickly in his new role. This is just my natural look. But it's great to actually see so many people logged onto this first session for the conference. Partners in place. Like everyone, I think I'm becoming accustomed to speaking at virtual events, but honestly, I really do look forward to getting out and about and to meet and engage with real 3D people again soon. And hopefully our new minister can continue to do more of that for himself over the coming months. I think whilst we're all returning to something approaching normality, this has been and remains a very challenging time for people and communities right up and down the country. But we've all got a role to play in improving outcomes for people. And the Scottish Government has a long-standing and really successful relationship with SURF. They're a key player in helping to shape and champion community-led regeneration in Scotland. And frankly, are just key partners and critical friends for us in regeneration. Community-led, place-based regeneration is at the heart of Scottish Government's approach to regen. And as we've already touched on, the relevance and value of place has been pushed even more to the fore by the pandemic, because those places, they shape who we are, they're the framework in which our lives take place, and they have enormous impact on our well-being and our opportunities to prosper. And to focus our ambitions for place, as you kind of mentioned, we collaboratively developed the place principle, adopted by Scottish Government and COSLA, and lots more beside. And I think it's worthwhile restating that the principle in its simplest form is really saying we need to work collaboratively, we need to work with our communities, we need to work with everything at our disposal and work towards the most relevant outcomes for that place. And I think it's things like that that have helped to increase that sense of localism that we've seen emerge throughout the pandemic. It's highlighted the importance of local places as essential elements of our community resilience, and provided valuable insight into how we can improve the lives of those in our communities using that kind of place-based approach. And that's vital, because if we're to address the deeply ingrained economic, environmental and social issues faced by some of our most disadvantaged and fragile communities, we do need a sustained, coordinated place-based approach across all our partners, working with people and communities to capitalise on local knowledge, local skills and local understanding. Our place-based approach is underpinned now by the place-based investment programme, backed by an initial £325 million of capital over the next 5 years to support community-led regeneration and accelerate our ambitions for place, for 20-minute neighbourhoods, and I'm happy to say for town centres. The programme aims to link and align all our place-based funding initiatives to ensure that we have a coherent approach to building resilient communities, to promote inclusive growth and well-being. And basically, it's the means by which we will hope to make the place principle real. In practice, this means that consideration will be given to how place-based investments align with other planned investments in a locality in order to streamline delivery and increase impact. It's basically, really simply, making sure that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So the investment will support community-led regeneration and town centre revitalisation, including the repurposing of buildings, maintenance and repairs, reallocating external space, and community-led land and asset acquisition. As part of this place-based investment programme, we're continuing with the delivery of the successful Regeneration Capital Grant Fund, supporting locally developed place-based regeneration projects, helping to tackle inequalities and deliver inclusive growth in disadvantaged areas. And since 2014, the Regeneration Capital Grant Fund has supported over 200 locally developed place-based projects right across the country. And more importantly, helping to tackle inequalities and support inclusive economic development in disadvantaged and fragile remote communities. In Govan, just last week, our new Minister, Tom Arthur, visited, and he was able to already see the really ambitious local regeneration plans being brought forward. Those that have already benefited from RCGF investment. That includes the Convener project, and he's able to see for himself and understand how that links up with other place-based investments and programs like the City Deal, and witness for himself how these together are working to bring about increased economic activity and increased opportunities for local communities. We also want to build on the vision from the independent review of the Town Centre Action Plan. That review was commissioned to provide us with an opportunity to rethink and re-energise our efforts to develop places that meet the diverse social, economic and environmental needs and ambitions of our communities. I think we can all safely say that, you know what, COP26 is happening this year, and climate change and net zero ambitions are here to stay for us. The review was also asked to advise on how to adapt 20-minute neighbourhoods for our cities, towns, rural and island communities. And we can safely say that, yeah, we support the overarching aim of the report to work with our communities to transform the future of their town centres. Our new policies must focus more on our people, our planet and economy. And we're working collaboratively with our partners to shape a delivery plan response for the Town Centre Action Plan, so that we can respond to the recommendations that are in the review and the propositions that are in the review, actually achieve the vision. The government's manifesto this year set out ambitions to support 20-minute neighbourhoods. Now, for those who don't know, they're effectively connected, compact, accessible places where people can meet their daily needs within a 20-minute walk, wheel or cycle for their homes, enabling people to live better, healthier lives and supporting their net zero ambitions. They prioritise quality of life and health, and progress to support the concept is being made across a number of key policy areas, with many local authorities embedding the thinking within their emerging approaches to recovery and long-term development. 20-minute neighbourhoods can also support community wealth building, improve people's health and well-being, increase social connections in communities, reduce emissions, and help make our towns and cities more resilient to the impacts of climate change. And I have to say, a little plug here, I'm really delighted that SURF has established a network of cross-sectoral regeneration practitioners to explore the applicability of 20-minute neighbourhoods to a variety of settings, including those communities which experience the most disadvantage. And I know that SURF will look to share that learning within their network and far beyond. And I think that's going to be really important for us. I think it's also worthwhile picking up on earlier comments made by Terry and Helen. Communities across Scotland have played a hugely vital role in supporting people through this pandemic. They've responded with agility and compassion. They've helped to ensure that people had all manner of things, from essential things like food and prescriptions and heating, to the softer things that are equally important to people's well-being, having someone to talk to, someone to interact with, and so much more besides. And community and social enterprise has been a critical part of our COVID response. And also, like you picked up on earlier, I know Tom Arthur is very proud to be the first minister in the Scottish Government to have community wealth embedded into his title, because that community wealth building model offers an additional way in which we can make transformative change by establishing a means for local, public and private sector partners to work together to build and retain more wealth in local communities. It offers a practical way for public-private sector partnerships to focus on their role as employers and purchasers of goods and services, and as asset owners within local communities. But successful community-led regeneration requires more than capital funding, which is why our funding programmes have helped over many years now to try and build capacity within our communities. And many of the organisations that lead local community responses to the pandemic have been or are receiving the support from things like the Invest in Communities Fund or other elements within the Empowerment Communities programme. over £17 million of additional funding for COVID response was rapidly delivered through the Supporting Communities Fund. And frankly, this was made possible by community anchor organisations who were really quickly able to get resource to where it was needed most, using their existing strong partnerships and forming new partnerships where they needed to, just like Terry was saying. Additionally, the Community Recovery Programme has supported 645 organisations, awarding over 13 million to community organisations, social enterprises, charities, voluntary groups to respond to the pandemic and basically build towards recovery. And in this year, 2021-22, that fund will provide a further 6.5 million to continue that support. In the last round of funding, the Communities Recovery Fund is taking a targeted place-based approach, similar to the Supporting Communities Fund, working with communities, third sector interfaces and local authorities in priority areas to identify where support is most needed, to identify what the challenges are and identify who's best placed to deliver that support. There'll also be £1 million to be delivered through 2020 to 22 through the Enabling Neighbourhoods and Communities Fund, which seeks to support local community groups and organisations as they endeavour to reconnect with their local community. And earlier this month, the Minister, Tom Arthur, he launched the Scotland Loves Local Fund, part of our £10 million commitment to deliver Scotland Loves the Local programme to support Scotland's towns and neighbourhoods in recovery from the pandemic. This is a multi-year fund and it'll help bring new creative projects and activity into our towns and neighbourhoods. It'll help build wealth in local communities, increase footfall and activity, and it'll support local partnerships and local enterprises to help improve the vitality of those communities. Up to £2 million will be available to commence projects in the current financial year. And this fund will strengthen the vital support being provided through the Scotland Loves Local marketing campaign. Thank you for the plug earlier, Ewan, much appreciated. And it will also be vital in supporting the Scotland Loves Local loyalty card scheme that's been launched. Finally, and on a personal note, I must say, I am really looking forward to participating in the 23rd Annual Surf Awards later this year. I know that the Minister has it in his calendar already and has expressed his happiness at being invited along. And I know that both of us really look forward to actually meeting some real people again in person and learning more about the absolutely fantastic examples of successful community-led regeneration that actually, when you just look for them in Scotland, absolutely abound. Thanks for the opportunity to take part today, and thanks for the opportunity to listen into the conversations. It's been really wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ian, and thanks for the very kind words that you said about surf, both our role and the attendance at the awards. We are also looking forward to having something happening in real space, and we're also glad that hopefully the judges will also be able to visit the sites, the applicants for the awards, because obviously visiting a place is quite different from reading about it in an online application. But it's at this point in the proceedings that we were about to sort of have the Minister very gently grilled by our esteemed panel, but Ian is now going to be maybe more poached in a gentler way. And I'm going to hand over now to Hazel Cross, who sits on SURF's board and works in economic development in Fife Council. So over to you, Hazel. You're muted.
As always, you're on mute. Our panel today consists of Anna Fowley, Lisa McLean and Kate Wimpress, along with Ian. And if I can just ask Anna, Lisa and Kate to each in turn give a brief introduction to themselves, the work that they do, and from their perspective, just really quickly what they feel is needed to build back better. So if I can start with Anna, please.
Good afternoon, 5 minutes into the afternoon. Lovely to be part of this event. I'm a big fan of surf, and I agree with Ian about the awards. It's a highlight of the year, so let's hope it all kind of works beautifully. So I'm the Chief Exec of the Scottish Council for Voluntary Organisations, SCVO. We have lots of roles. We provide services to charities, community groups and social enterprises across the country, and we also lobby on behalf of the sector, and have done a lot over the last 18 months now to, for example, distribute £770 million on behalf of Scottish Government to the third sector, and to provide information to voluntary organisations to help them get through the pandemic. But I think I'm here actually because I was on the Social Renewal Advisory Board, and I suppose my mantra of the moment is, could we stop talking about stuff and get on with it? We've got hundreds of reports. Can we just please do it? So we'll elaborate on that more later, but that's my main mantra of the moment.
Thank you, Anna. Can I ask Lisa, can you give a quick introduction to yourself and your work, and also from your perspective, what we can do to help build back better or stronger?
Thanks, Hazel, and again, thank you to SURF for inviting me along today. I'm Lisa McLean. I'm Chief Executive of Urusara Gaussing, that's Gaussing Estate Trust. It's a 56,000 acre community-owned estate. It's been in community ownership since 2007 and covers most of the northwest of the Isle of Lewis and the Outer Hebrides. I'm also chair of Community Land Outer Hebrides, the organisation I referred to earlier on, which has, I guess, been one of the big successes, I would say, that's come out of COVID for us in the Outer Hebrides. I agree with Anna. I too served in the Social Renewal Advisory Board, which is again why I'm here. I very much agree with you. I feel like we talk and talk and talk, and it would be great to just get doing. I think we even have it on the very our calls to action. We have closing the gap between promise and practice, and we need to get to the practice part as soon as possible. I think as well we need to not lose sight of the creative thinking and get bogged down with a lot of the processes and procedures and how we go about it and all the initiatives and sometimes some of the whitewashing. I don't mean to sound critical, but sometimes that's what happens. So I think for me, I don't want us to be flash in the pan. I want us to focus on the fundamentals and truly build back better, and not just say it as well. And I'm really keen to hear more from people today about what that actually means in practice.
That's great. Thank you, Lisa. Kate, same question to you, please.
Thanks very much, Hazel. Well, as I said earlier on, I have the privilege of being the chair of the Scottish Regeneration Forum and have done so for the last number of years. So it's been an absolute privilege and honour to see the information gathered across the COVID experience from our very wide and diverse network. Alongside that, I also had the opportunity to be the convener of Scotland's first Citizens' Assembly. Again, an absolute privilege to hear voices from across the country, ordinary folk coming together to discuss what was important to them, and I think showed the mettle of our nation when we had to leap online as the Assembly completed its work during the pandemic. The report, as has been noted, was published, and I think I concur with Anna and Lisa that the synergies between the reports that are coming out are strong, manifest, and we need to get on with things. But also during the day, I run North Edinburgh Arts Centre, which is a dedicated cultural space in Muirhouse, which, as many of you will know, is one of the communities in our country facing the biggest challenges, and I have seen on a day-to-day basis the response that our community has put together in facing the very difficult challenges that COVID brought to our doors. And again, concurring with the previous speakers, it was that local intelligence and that ability to be agile and compassionate that really got us through it. So to echo some of our speakers, it's all about relationships, it's all about trust, it's all about agility and compassion. But now is the time where we need to really grasp the nettle, shift the balance and make some changes. And within that, some people will lose out and some people will gain. So I think we just have to get on with that. So I'm looking forward to the discussion starting.
Thank you, Kate. So I suppose really it's where we are. It's obviously 10 years from the Christie report. As all our panel members have alluded to, there's been quite a lot of talk, lots of think tanks, lots of policy changes, but still it probably feels that we're not quite there yet. And you know, the questions remain around about, if not, why not? The pandemic obviously brought into sharp focus the need for transformational change at rapid pace to policy and practice, so that can build in the resilience to respond and recover. And from that, the Social Renewal Advisory Board published its report in January 21, if not now when. And in there were 20 calls to action, covering 3 themes of money and work, people rights and advancing equality, and communities and collective endeavour. So really the first question I would want to direct to Ian, actually, in place of the Minister, is, given the ambition for collective endeavour and everything that you've told us in your presentation, really, if you could just tell us a little bit more about what the Scottish Government's plans are for continuing to move forward and help enable the action points from the SRAB report, including things like infrastructure support and you know, enabling that community capacity building and the community having a stronger role at the table. Ian.
Thanks. Nothing like being put on the spot right away. I think we have already seen a fair bit of change in Scottish Government's approach, and I do take the points that Anna and others have made about there's an awful lot of reports, and actually now we should just be stealing Nike's view and just do it. Which I think is absolutely splendid. But to answer the question, yeah, you're seeing a lot of change in terms of investment approaches. The place-based investment programme, whilst that's only £350 million, actually it's a really big enabler and a really big tool to get the whole of Scottish Government and the whole of public and community sector thinking about actually what can we achieve better when we're collaborating together and bringing all our investments together and considering that kind of place-based approach and that place principle as it impacts on the ground in a place. And I think that's been hugely important. And whilst we've seen all those reports, they do start filtering through. They are making positive changes. We can see place-based approaches being taken much more broadly across public health colleagues, much more broadly by economic development, by housing colleagues as well are adopting this. It seems almost incremental, but it's those, because we've had our nose up against it, all of us in this virtual room have had our nose up against it so closely for so long. Sometimes we lose sight of the real progress that's been made. And it's not until you kind of go to other places that you see and hear some of the envy that they have for that kind of close collaboration between public and community and third sector in Scotland. And I hope we're going to see more of that collaboration between public and private sector now as well. Yeah, those kind of influences have made a difference. You can see now there is a much greater acceptance of multi-year funding and much more nimble and agile responses to how communities shape their own agenda and their own future, not just in the wishy-washy, this is what our vision is, but actually in the development and the delivery of their local plans. And you can see how that's permeated through a whole host of things. But yeah, I agree. We're not in an industry of creating plans. We want to be in an industry of creating improvement. and I'll shut up now, otherwise I could witter on about this for hours. I'm sorry.
No, thanks, Ian, that's good. So what you're saying is there's incremental changes along the journey. There's enablers starting to happen. We're seeing that in practice. And I think I really want to come to Anna now about Anna, your role when sitting on the the Social Renewal Advisory Board. You blogged about a shift in the balance of representation at the table and how that actually changed the conversation. So if you could tell us a little bit more about that experience, and also from your point of view, what do we need now to make it happen? So what do we need now to stop the chat and continue with the action?
Yeah, I'll resist singing Oasis on this in terms of make it happen in a Manchester accent, because I'm from Inverness, I can't do that. So I think the experience was interesting. I was invited onto the Social Renewal Advisory Board just after I'd made a public statement about there being too many groups. And I kind of thought, oh, and now I've been invited onto one, I'm going to have to say yes. So, but I have now also said I'm not sitting on any more groups that are talking about utopia. I'm only going to sit on groups that are doing things. And I've had to actually pull out of stuff because they're only talking about utopia. And I think Ian's right in that we are envied. I mean, I meet my colleagues, counterparts in other bits of the UK for our words. I don't think it's necessarily followed up by our actions. And for me, I think what was interesting in that, in terms of your first part of your question, Hazel, was that it's the only time I've been in a situation where there's been a larger proportion of members of the group who were from the voluntary sector, community sector, whatever you want to call it, as opposed to the public sector. And that was interesting, and a balance of national and local and all of that kind of thing. And I think that helped the conversation. I think and also we had two cabinet secretaries chairing it who were really into it and really got it, and one who was really DWOP happy, which was quite entertaining. But where I think we fall down is accountability. So what we have is people, like probably quite a few of us, to be honest, coming up with things and writing things, and that's us, and we are doing that, and then somehow it's them out there who've got to make it happen. And it's, it's councils that need to do that, it's Social Security Scotland that need to do that, it's UK government that need to do that, it's the public, it's whatever. Actually, it's all of us, and that collective endeavour thing I think is a genuine thing. But everything I've heard so far, and I think Ian, you should probably have mentioned John Swinney's role in cabinet in terms of having that. He said something like, "I'm the minister for getting everybody to talk to each other" or something. So he has that role, and that's really interesting. And I think he, of all people, can do that. But it's a challenge when it comes to the health civil servants, for example, not public health, but health, justice, even people who deal with education, who are very used to that centralising thing that we have, and that need to feel, and that urge for consistency, that antipathy to what people like to call a postcode lottery, I think is about localism and place. So there's a whole kind of people have to accept, everybody, including me and including all of us here, that they need to be accountable. So we've got the National Performance Framework, we've got national outcomes, they're all great, they all support all of this stuff. Christie's 10 years on, and we have made some progress. 10 years though, it's embarrassing that we're sitting now kind of celebrating that. We should have delivered it. So we have lots of specifics in the AGR report, we've got specifics in the STRAB, we've got specifics in the Citizens Assembly, and various things along the way, the Commission for Local Democracy that was in 2014. We've had all of those things along the way, and I'm still sitting in meetings hearing very senior people in the public sector particularly, and in government saying, do you know, we really need to talk about poverty. We really need to get better at using data. Do you know, digital inclusion? And you think, oh, no, could we actually somehow do something about that? And some of that is about money, as you've mentioned, but some of it's just about accountability and people stepping up to the plate and being responsible. There you are. Here endeth my lesson.
Thanks, Anna. Very interesting, and one of the calls for action was about having that community of experience. So the people who are delivering on the ground and the people who are, place-based is all about being locally shaped and that trust, and local collaborations and partnerships to coordinate and deliver. And I think really that then leads me on to my question for Lisa, who gave a really good introduction into the Galston State Trust, 56,000 acres across rural Scotland and community ownership since 2007, and delivering fantastic projects for people in place throughout that time. So I suppose what would be helpful, Lisa, is to gain an understanding with that journey in mind of the challenges in developing that empowered community, and what we can learn from that to put into practice, as we move forward and build back.
Okay, thanks, Hazel. Well, I think it has been said before that empowerment's very easy to say, but very difficult to do. And I think that's true. It's a long-term process, and certainly one that I don't believe has started in 2007 only with community ownership. The Galston Estate area, that area, and perhaps much more widely even within the Western Isles, there's been a long history of cooperatives and community working and so on. So I think community empowerment was something that was already in place, and something that actually drove a community to consider community ownership and have the confidence to be able to do that. From my perspective, I would say probably the biggest barrier ever to community empowerment is when hope dies. And I think I've seen that in waves throughout my time, certainly, that over the past 11 years with Galston Estate. I think I've been particularly optimistic at times when I've had a seat at the table and felt that change was going to happen and that we were going to see the outcomes and the impacts of that, only to discover that that hope could die and that my seat at the table was nothing more than tokenism. So I think for me, that's where the barriers can occur, is very much what Anna has already referred to, is that accountability. It's one thing to have us there. It's a completely different thing to have us there and have a collective endeavour and have a truly sincere collective and collaborative partnership that co-designs, not one where community are brought in at the end, or there's consultation at the end of something. So I think these barriers have allowed us to have a friendship and relationship with maybe some of our public sector organisations where it blows a bit hot and cold, and that's where we need to get beyond that and build the trust so that we know that we're going to have partners with whatever it is the community decides they want to embark upon. And I think the community I work for have demonstrated that in spite of that, they have still succeeded. They've developed a £5 million wind energy development, and of course that has been made possible because there have been national programmes that have allowed us to have funding that has enabled that. I agree with many of the points that have already been made this morning by Terry and Helen as well, around how we need much more investment that's unrestricted. I think we need to stop talking about funding. It's investment into communities to allow them to do what they need to do. And much more of a desire to serve the community rather than the community just being a mechanism. It's about ensuring that there's a serving role that goes on there to enable stronger local leadership, and leadership that has a good understanding of local governance in a place. I think as well, though, that we have had positive experiences, and I think as a community that has that strength, we've been able to form some relationship. I think it's probably not the same can be said for some of the other community organisations that haven't come to the table with money in the bank and good strong leadership. They maybe are just starting out on their journey. But yeah, ultimately, I think it is about just closing those gaps in relationship mostly, and dropping the tokenism.
Great, thank you, Lisa. Had to remember to take myself off on mute there. thank you for that great informative response to the question there. I suppose, Ian, I want to explore with you the place-based investment programme. You mentioned earlier it was to help enact the place principle, and taking on board the comments and response from Lisa there. Community empowerment is easy to say but difficult to do. How can we continue to support, or how can the Scottish Government continue to support the place-based investment programme to support empowered communities, which is delivered through the local authority network? It is capital in nature. So I suppose my question to you is, how can we continue to harness and develop that kind of hyper-local activity, which we've seen during the lockdowns, without overburdening it with regulation and monitoring? And again, I'm going to steal a little bit from Lisa's response, without people just losing hope or feeling there's a tokenism around it. So yeah, the question is, how can we continue to harness and develop that hyper-local activity without overburdening it with regulation and monitoring?
That's $100 million question, and I wish I had the ideal answer. But it is that balance, and Anna's already talked about it. It's providing that opportunity for localism, but at the same time recognizing accountability. And I'm sorry, this sounds like something out of a Spider-Man thing with grey, which I really reject now that I've got it in my head. But it is that fine balance. I think in terms of the place-based investment programme, yes, it's a capital programme, but as I think I referred to earlier in my speech, it's capital investment isn't enough on its own. We have to provide resource investment to support communities to be able to do that work of shaping and designing and frankly delivering the kind of changes and improvements that they want to see. It's not an either or. It has to be each supporting the other. We've tried in terms of the place-based investment programme to write in certain criteria within that, so that it pushes forward on the areas that we think are most important. Fundamental to that is actually make sure that you've got the community views and it's led by those interests. That it's not just, let's send this to the local authorities and the local authority decide on their own what's happening. In this case, local authorities are there as the vehicle to support and serve those ambitions. I think that was a really good word to use, service of our communities. It's important to remember who we are part of and who we are working with and for, rather than to. And I know that's a glib, simple statement for a Scottish Government official to come out with, but this simple Scottish Government official happens to believe it. And I'll stop talking. Again, I have to remind myself.
Thanks, Ian. That's, again, interesting and informative response in terms of place-based investment fund being an enabler that comes to the table in the place of collaborative partnerships, and with the local authority being the vehicle, almost on the understanding that community collaboration and partnership works there and the feed up. So that's interesting. Again, I want to come to Kate in terms of Kate's role on the Citizens' Assembly. The consensus from the Citizens' Assembly was the kind of country Scotland wants to be, and I think what integral to that is the open, honest dialogue between Scotland's citizens, Scottish Government and local authorities, and that will help with place-based investment fund and other funding collaborative working. But Kate, I want to really ask what your thoughts are, given your experience as the chair of SARF and the convener of the first Citizens Assembly, and also within the creative regeneration sector in the community, what your thoughts are on the challenges for continuing to develop these relationships in practice.
And thanks, Hazel. And I hope I'll keep this short and succinct as we're kind of running up to the end of our session. But yeah, with the Citizens Assembly, it was clear that you know, that open, honest dialogue was really important to the citizens for the statements of their vision out of 10 centred on the need for open, transparent information and dialogue. And as Anna has pointed out, there's a sense within the recommendations of the Assembly that accessibility was key, but also accountability. And I think we do get the sense that people are thinking, right, talk now, we've got to prove that we can do it. So that was kind of the accountability theme ran throughout the Citizens Assembly process. And I have to say that the success of a Citizens Assembly is not that you set up more Citizens Assemblies, that it's that you actually look at the findings and start doing things. So taking those challenges on, taking on board that experience, the SURF experience, and also that of North Edinburgh, I should say, I think I've got four and a half points, I think, that really spring to mind, and it's not going to surprise anybody having listened to our discussions. One is that the capacity of communities to respond. It is great coming to the table, but you need to be invested in to come to the table to be able to then implement. And of course, we are talking about the communities that have been most depleted through COVID across the last 18 months. And I think if we have got this idea that we've got an ongoing shift in dynamics for local authorities, in particular positioning them as enablers rather than deliverers, then the enabled really clearly need to be invested in and to be supported to make those changes. We need, as we've all said, I think, to move away from consulting and gathering of ideas to implementation. The Renewal Board Assembly, SURF Manifesto, there's a clear direction, there are robust sources, and we need now to challenge and change how resources flow, where they end up, and how they actually hit the ground. And I suppose the last half bit that I wanted to add in was, sometimes these debates are being played out in social media, and I do wonder that that's not a great environment for nuanced and kind of deep thinking. So I'm wondering if, you know, maybe we should just keep social media for our social lives and keep political discussion elsewhere.
Thank you, Kate. That's a really interesting point about the social media as well. So community capacity to respond, we've heard from earlier from Helen and Terry as well. How do we build that capacity and continue to build it in practice? And also that shift in influence and control and local authorities becoming more enablers and facilitators of community aspiration and response, and working in partnership in that locally shaped production. So I'm a bit of a talker as well, Ian, but I'm going to ask you another question. In continuing with that spirit to build capacity and develop that culture of community empowerment and leadership with honest and open dialogue, what are your thoughts on how we can value the power to try and fail as a tool to learn, innovate and develop?
I think we always learn more from where things go wrong, because we tend to look more deeply into the whys and the wherefores. We're not very good at sharing that kind of stuff, though. And I know that because in one of my other roles, I'm trying to pull together materials for an Our Place website, and I can honestly say thanks to SURF for sending me some excellent examples of really good community-led activity that's making a difference. But actually, not many people want to talk about their failures. And funnily enough, I can't see that changing. But if we shine a better light on those that have been successful and try and understand more of the reasons why they've been successful, then we can encourage more of those positive approaches and I know it's maybe not as good, but people just aren't desperately keen to go, here's my best failure.
Yep.
It would be an awfully honest person who did it, and God, I'd love them for it.
Thanks, Ian. Thank you for that, and thank you to all the panel members for your insights today. It's been really informative. I found it really informative and helpful, and I hope everyone else has as well. I suppose in summing up, the journey, we're still on the journey. We're still evolving, we're still learning, we're still sharing practice. And perhaps we're a little bit further, well, we're further along than we've been before. But yeah, at a local, it's important that we continue to shape activity and collaborate and communicate and coordinate responses, understanding people's roles, responsibilities and accountabilities against the backdrop of a strong sort of policy and legislative framework, and also funding framework. And I suppose one of the key things is we share success, but we also need to learn, but we also need to share the fails to learn and share that knowledge as well. Thank you very much, and thank you to all the panel members. That's been really informative and I found it really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hazel, and thank you very much to the panelists. And I think I should probably quote my predecessor, Andy Milne, to whom we are all greatly indebted, me in particular, because I've not stepped into his shoes. But he said, we don't need any more policy. We have policy coming out of our ears in Scotland. And I think in my actual job interview for this position with Kate, I looked at the SRAB and the Citizens Assembly and said, we know what needs done. It's the how. Which I then heard Ailish Angeloni saying in a much more erudite way, saying we're good on ideas, but we're not strong on implementation. But I'm here for the how, and I want SURF to be talking about how we actually do things. And I think if we're looking for failures, talk to frontline service workers, not their bosses. If the higher up the chain you go, you'll always say everything's fine. But frontline people who are working on the front line, they will tell you where things are definitely not working. So I'm sure we'll enable that for you, Ian, that information to come to you in some way. But can I pass briefly over to my colleague Emma, who is not only organised today, but she's about to do a bit of a pitch.
Yes, just a few adverts, then I'll let you go. So I'll just quickly share my screen. Bear with me. So I should thank Ian for his great pitch for the SURF Awards earlier. That is what I'm opening with here. So the SURF Awards are getting close to the deadline now. That's 5 PM on Monday, the 6th of September. So still a bit of time, and it is only a short application form. You'll see our image this year is a bear, because that's about the feeling of coming out of hibernation as we all get back into a room together, although I don't think we want to be in a room with a bear. I'm currently in a room with a wasp, and that's bad enough. So we've got the 5 categories are the same as last year: community-led regeneration, supporting youth employability, Scotland's most improved place, housing and regeneration, and creative regeneration. So as I say, it is a short application form. If you want to get your applications in, if you know a project, if you work with a project, you volunteer with a project, then get an application in before 5 PM on the 6th. And we are hoping to be back in a room, not doing it virtually with hampers this year for the awards dinner, and that's on Thursday the 9th of December, but there'll be some more information on that to come. Just a quick pitch for membership. I know a lot of people on here are members, but if you're not a member, it is quite a cheap rate. It's £50 plus VAT for organisations and 20 for community groups and individuals. It's a free way to promote your organisation via our network. You get involved with some of the consultations like the Manifesto, and you get advance notice of all SURF activities and events, and you get some pre-booking as well, because some of the stuff does book up quite quickly. So if you are interested in that, you can go on the SURF website just under Join SURF, or I will send some information following the event. And just lastly, on SURF events, they are getting a bit few now as we get towards the end of the year, but there are 2 other conference sessions tomorrow and Thursday as part of this overall kind of Partners in Place. Tomorrow's focuses on place-based regeneration, and Thursdays focuses on climate change. So again, that's on the SURF page where you're booked for this one if you're interested. There will be recordings of all three, so if you can't make it along, they will all end up on our YouTube channel. And just lastly, thanks for coming, but also when I sent out the materials, I did send out evaluation forms, and I would really appreciate it if you could quickly fill those in and email them back to me at emma@surf.scot. And that's me done with my pitch, Ewan. So I'll hand back to you.
Thank you very much, Emma. And once again, thank you to all those who contributed this morning and for those of you who have joined us. And as we say goodbye, can I ask the speakers to stay in the Zoom room, and we'll have a quick wash up just as we go. And I don't know if Kate, if there's any last words that you want to say.
Ewan, no, just to say thanks very much for everybody attending. I think these online sessions are so incredibly valuable, and also to have this strength of desire to start doing, recorded and kept for posterity. Hopefully we'll be able to look back next year and realise that this was a pivotal point.
Thank you very much, Kate, and goodbye to everyone else.